and interrupt your very inspired and enthusiastic discussions. We are all right, yes, get some more people in, and we are heading for the conclusion of our. I call them, yeah. Oh, really? Okay. Yeah, no need. Okay. Yes. No. But I think we leave it. Yes. Yeah. So we have some time reserved, as announced before, for a plenary discussion. And I think there is no need, except you want to come here on the rostrum. Now Michael is gone. But maybe you just stay at your place, you look at each other, and we take some time. We had quite many talks, and we had the concurrent session, but maybe there are things which just are still in your mind, and during the presentations, now and then we pointed to this time that there is the chance to put questions. So please feel free, if there is still, if you still have something in mind or something you want to bring up, please feel free to address one of the presenters, or even put a question to the audience, and we can get into a exchange. So Michael Barnes is still here, Catherine Cornell is still here, Leandro Bedin Fontana is here, and Sandra Mazzolini is here, Gaetano Savitano is here, and who else? The presenters, oh, yes, of course, Anje, welcome. Sister, the microphone, please.
I think this might be a general question, and maybe in African context that anyone can answer. You know, we talk about dialogue, and from where I come from, that's from the base, as a missionary, looking at the people and then visiting the interland, I asked myself, how can we help these people to get themselves involved in this dialogue we talk about? Because I think either Leandro says something about maybe people do not have that substance of our doctrine, you know, the rudiments of our doctrine. So how can they involve themselves in dialogue? Do we understand what I'm saying?
Would you like to address it directly to Dr. Fontana, or?
I can start. So if I understand it properly, if people do not have a doctrinal basis common, how can they engage in dialogue, exchange, and so on? Yes, that was actually the idea I was trying to deconstruct. So dialogue, evangelization, if thought just in terms of doctrinal or let us say intellectual exchange, or I think it is not, it doesn't get to the point that we, or to the shift that we might be called to engage with, because I think this is one side perhaps of dialogue, intellectual exchange. But then is the question, are the people at the grassroots really interested in intellectual exchange? Can they participate? And I think this is also not the essence of the church, or at least how I understand church and the good news of the gospel and the practice of Jesus Christ. So I was just trying to move away from this concentration of content and also over-rationalization of faith. So in the sense, we have only the mediation of intellect, of reason, to get to the essence or to the good news of. And then I try to say, no, let us try to engage in a more performative way. Performative means action, interaction, symbolic. These are other dimensions that we might have neglected over the years. And I think this is something that could be a way out of this crisis of faith, because it is not perhaps a crisis of faith because people do not believe. It may be rather that the faith that we think people should have is not so important. And this is what I try to do with epistemological security, epistemological crisis. So these are the questions I try to put very provocatively, I know, and I'm thankful when I am criticized, but I think we should engage a little more with these questions, especially when we are doing mission, if we want to use this term, doing mission, what we mean by that, because my problem is always the idea we have to convey a message in the sense, okay, I understood something intellectually, I have to pass on to him, and he has to understand it exactly as I understand, but I don't think that works. So that is my impression. And Pentecostalism is my field of work, opened my eyes to this question, because Pentecostalism doesn't work in that way. And in that way, I try to provoke our reflections. But,
are there any comments to that? Yeah, even so, among the experts and...
No, in line with this, I would like to add just one thing that we also shared during the presentation of one of the sister from Myanmar. The problem is not the communication of news, but the issue is the sharing of an experience. That is precisely the way in which the good news works. And this is a change, a turning point in the understanding of how the good news can be spread.
I wanted to say in the same issue.
Sure. Go ahead.
Because Professor Sabeta said the thing, in our communities, we have the doctrine for a long time. They teach each one other the doctrine. But where is the experience of Jesus Christ? This is what I wanted to say. I mean, it's not only the content of the message, It's how we live the content, this content of message, in order that the person can adopt this content. I think there is there we have this problem, and we have this problem in Middle East too. So in the Eastern churches, so we are making the same experience as in American Africa, in Latin America, and is everywhere. And here we are losing people, we are losing faithful. Why? Because we indoctrined them, but we didn't give them Jesus Christ by experience. No, this is a point of view that I wanted to share. Thank you.
Thank you. Catherine.
Just to add to that, and with regard to your question, I think it's also a matter of catechesis on the ground. So how are we teaching people to be Christian? So, you know, the normal way in which we are taught or catechized has to do with, you know, the absolute uniqueness of our own religion. We have the only truth and so on. And so other religions are immediately seen as dangerous or as the enemy and so on. So how we catechize people with an attitude of openness towards God's presence in other religions that make them less fearful of one another, I think is a really big challenge. And to do that in a way without losing one's commitment or one's faith to one's own tradition. So I think those are things on the ground among the everyday believers that are really a challenge to convey. Because I notice that so many people who, you know, are leaders in the church have no idea of these documents, you know, Dialogue and Proclamation, Nostra Aetate, you know, so they start from a very classical, traditional catechesis, and how we catechize first the people who catechize the people on the ground in an attitude of greater openness and less fearfulness towards religious others. I think that's a very big challenge.
Thank you.
A brief remark, and it's brought out by seeing my friend Rocco there. Francis Xavier. I got to know Francis Xavier when I went to India 40 years ago. And 3 years ago, I started writing about it, and I realized what a profound impact that man, after 400 years or whatever it is, was making on me, because I was getting close to places where he had been, and I had met a few communities that could probably trace their world back to, their religious world back to Francis. And I was always impressed when I went back to look at Francis. He evangelized by getting people to pray. It wasn't a matter of teaching lots of stuff. I mean, I don't think he had the language, but he went out with his little bell, and he got people together, and he got them to pray. And I think that's where it begins, and that's spirituality. You know? Spirituality underpins everything. Once you've got some sort of sense of the experience of the good news of Jesus Christ, once you've got some sense of that, conversations can begin, but conversations will begin when people are asking questions which are important to them. And we shouldn't presume to know what is important to them. We've got to draw that out the whole time. That's the great skill of spiritual conversation. Not dialogue, conversation. It's much more informal than we sometimes allow.
Thank you. Rocco.
Okay, it doesn't work for me. It's a sign from heaven. I need to shut up. Just a reflection on this word, doctrine. You know, if I start from my experience, it's not because I want to say, imply that my experience is more important than yours. It's simply that in the recent years, I prefer to do that, but to express some convictions that I have matured. To go as a newly ordained priest immediately to England and immediately engage in pastoral work, having to prepare homilies, meaningful, significant for the people here. And then after 4 years, do the same in Tagalog. And then back to England And then now in Japan, after almost 20 years of ordination, I find myself having to give a message of 3 minutes at the early Mass in the morning with the sisters I attend to, and I need to wake up 1 hour earlier to prepare just 4 lines, 5 lines of reflection. So this experience has really taught me never to take formulas, expressions, words for granted. I could improvise maybe some reflection in England. Okay, say something. But I couldn't do that in Japan. I find myself always having to look for the words to express what I want to say, but they may be meaningful to the others. So this has forced me into a process of simplification, maybe oversimplification of my theological knowledge. You have to find examples. So when I think of doctrine, I just remind myself that those are formulas. They were intended as formulas to sum up an experience, a spirituality, a knowledge and awareness of the faith that needed to be expressed in words that are like shorthands. The problem is when we keep the formula and we are no longer aware of its original meaning or its original intention. So my personal experience is that in dialogue and in proclaiming, which for me have become one in 95% of my ministry, it's one. As I respond to the questions of my non-Catholic, non-Christian friends, I find myself preaching. Always to go back to the original intention. What was the meaning that when the formula became common currency, what did we intend to communicate in that? And that has helped me a lot to become easier to understand. And now I find myself doing the same thing in Italian. So I'm not afraid of using the word doctrine or doctrinal formula, because it's all about never stopping questioning ourselves, never take for granted that when we say something, we understand the same thing. When I use the word inori in Japanese, that is normally translated as prayer in dictionaries, if I say that word to a Buddhist or to a Catholic nun or to a Shinto priest, they don't mean the same thing. So again, it's a challenge for me, but as a result of trying to understand more deeply my own doctrinal formulas, it has become a way of developing also my own faith. So just a reflection on that word. I think it's important if we want to be also effective, constantly to challenge ourselves. Never take for granted that the word that comes from our mouth conveys the exact meaning that what we're saying. It's profoundly destabilizing. But the best way to understand if I am able to communicate is to ask the other, what have you understood? What have you perceived from? And that really becomes a beautiful dialogue experience, I think.
So that seems to be a great fruit of mission, that we constantly ask ourselves about the wording and the translation. Just one immediate question, Sister, are you somehow content with what with the answers? It's okay, yeah, please jump in again if that's not the case. But
no, I want just to add something on what Rocco was saying. The fact that I personally feel that is important also to, as scholars or theologians or missiologists, as you like, we should feel responsible also somehow for the people of other faith. For me, it's very important as a Christian theologian to think of the child that comes from Morocco or Egypt, who is living in Italy and who is going to know some Italian, and the fact that he keep on saying that Allah is the only God, or that Muhammad is the only prophet. Okay, I think we should, as missiologists or people who reflect on that, also feel the responsibility towards these people, in the sense to try to communicate to them how this should be thought, of course, that the reality is different. Try to somehow to help them also to be helped, but to change their ideas on that. Also, it means to have a dialogue with them, that it is perhaps is not a theological dialogue, but it is dialogue who somehow goes at a different level, but very, very important and meaningful for me.
Thank you. There is Francis Anthony and then Bettina Fontana.
Well, this question came up to my mind when Leandro was talking about South America. But also Rocco has given his part into this thinking. That is, in proclamation, in dialogue, we are dealing with language. Language is the most sophisticated part of the culture and religion. Without language, you don't have, or the best abstract part of culture is language. And without language, you can't communicate religion, we can say, no. Because so when you're talking about Latin America and the cultures, and I said, when I was young, I mean, in the middle school, I used to understand, okay, what is North America, South America? I would always ask, where is Latin America? I can't understand where it is. Latin America basically uses, let us say, Spanish and Portuguese, Brazilian, no? So the whole continent just speaking two languages. Instead, you imagine Asia or India, so many languages, and languages are the ones that give life to the types of religions we have. So, thinking, if you're taking seriously the indigenous people, Amazon, I ask myself, where is their language? In theologizing, in communicating. We are using, okay, English because we need to use in an international setup. But that is not the language that communicates experience, that I live. No, I need my language that I can later. So I think our proclamation dialogue lacks a lot of basis because our theologies are done elsewhere. We are not doing it in our own languages. And most of our religious tradition, like early Christianity, Islam, and every other religion age, are connected to specific languages, people who live those languages. So I think we have to take languages and theologizing in local languages very seriously if you want to be really effective in mission.
Leandro, Bettina Fontana.
Thank you for this contribution. And I'd like to connect what you said, Michael, what you said, Rocco, because I think these two important aspects. So I understand you, Rocco, the problem of translation, the problem of conveying. So you have two possibilities. So keeping on that path, and I'd like to combine what you said, Michael, propose also provoking for us another path, avoiding language, at least for liturgy, at least for church. And the most a difficult thing for me to understand, and people also ask me very often in Germany, what is it about that Pentecostals speak in tongues? So speaking in tongues means each one will speak his own tongue, but nobody understands anything. So this is the idea of suspending the rational, suspending language, at least for a while, but that creates a kind of profound union in the community. And then you can perhaps theologize later on, but there may be a use of suspending language, suspending preciseness, and perhaps embracing ambiguity. And that's what I was trying to say with symbolic, performative, because this communicates something somehow and creates reality. That's what I was also trying to say. Performative reality creates, but as long as we are caught up in language problems, we might be caught up also in getting into contact, in engaging with the other, because language has always also an affective component. So, for example, the word salvation does not have the same affective value as for you. And when I employ it or avoid it, there is a difference. So a liberation theology won't employ the same words as another. So, and I think we should consider, perhaps as a vision, also suspending language problems, also finding another way to try to solve these problems of being together as a being and being communal, being church, and so on. So, and as to you, Father, yes, I completely agreed with you. I cannot recall, but I think in Latin America we have more than 200 languages. So that is not as much as in India, but it is a lot of language. And this is precisely what the Synod, the Amazon Synod, tried to do, to bring these languages, these faces, to the church. Because the church is really, in many respects, caught up in colonial terms, so Portuguese and Spanish, and certain classes also in the clergy and so on. And all these indigenous, autochthonous people, and their languages, of course, are not coming to theology, are not coming to the church, and so on. And this is a real problem, yes.
More reactions? Yes, please, Rocco.
I understand your point because we do share a common vision, a common feeling, a common understanding of language. But again, going to my experience, painful experience, and I'm sure that Kevin, Catherine, her knowledge of Japanese, and the others who have been in Japan. And, in Japan, silence is problematic. Avoiding language can sound a solution in Europe, in Italy, in England, in the context we're familiar with. In Japan, it's profoundly problematic. When they say that you learn Japanese, your knowledge of Japanese increases, your increased knowledge of Japanese and master of Japanese is shown by the fact that you use fewer and fewer words. The language, the silence is language in Japanese. But the difficulty is that Japanese people have a way of understanding in what way interpret their language, their silence. We don't. And even in their communication, there is a lot of misunderstandings, and they continuously need confirmation. If you make a phone call to a Japanese person, and you expect the Italian phone call, I speak, the other one keeps silent, then the other one speaks. It doesn't happen that way. When you speak with a Japanese person, even in presence, You say, oh, you know, yesterday I had, and while you are speaking, the other person will go, really? So desu ne. All this kind of, we had to have special classes to learn this kind of language that is designed to acknowledge what the other is saying. So just to say that, even what we see as a viable solution in general, we need each other. We need the experience of the Catholic Church in order to balance and destroy the illusion that one viable solution may be the solution, the absolute. You see, if I avoid language in Japan, it's worse than if I speak using the word that is not the exact word in the particular context. They just go crazy. If you want to punish and make a Japanese person uncomfortable when they're having a conversation, just don't talk. They just, so just to balance a little, that thing.
Okay, we have somehow deepened these questions. Maybe new things arise. Yes.
I try to provoke some new things. So we have been contemplating on these magisterial texts, Redemptoris Missio, Dialogue and Proclamation, and we are orienting texts. We are texts which try to keep the Catholic Church in line in a certain mode of thinking and dealing with topics addressed in there. So all the experts who have been presenting some papers related to these texts, if you're a bit of a futurologist, what might you think could be a next text, magisterial or similar or otherwise offered by some dicasterion, in line of these two texts? I mean, we have seen this Christian witness in a multi-religious world as a kind of follow-up or, as a next step. But if you have a hunch, what comes next? What would the speakers and experts on these texts think what would come next, offered by the magisterium of some sort? Anyone
that's
has a...
really...
I am not an expert of these texts.
In sense...
No, in my opinion, two areas could be touched. One came very strongly during the latest plenaria of the Dicasterium of Interreligious Dialogue. I think Father Indunil, also, Monsignor Indunil also talked about that. It is something on the spirituality of interreligious dialogue. That is the very... And according to me, it should be done also something on the dialogue itself, but from a different perspective. The Christian witness, the document Christian Witness in a Multicultural World was efforts of different denominations, Christian denomination, of people belonging to different traditions. So something similar should be done in the area of dialogue, because it's important to see how others see dialogue. Perhaps they will not call dialogue, they will call in different ways. But to create this reflection from a different perspective on the issue of dialogue would be very interesting.
Thank you. Other aspects in this line? So we are not very visionary, not yet. There is one hand raised.
Thank you very much for the last provocation. And it's wonderful, I don't know whether I should use that play of mind. Yeah, what would be, what would be the next? And I would like to draw your attention to the urgency of a renewed missionary spirit in the church itself, and to the expression which is very underlined also by Pope Francis from his very first document, Evangelii Gaudium, and which occurs again in the last constitution on the reform of Roman Curia, which is the missionary conversion. So if I can just give some space to my fantasy, something, maybe toward a missionary conversion in the church. Well, it is needed for all of us, for all Christians, for that missionary conversion. And on the other side, if the church's identity is evangelization, as the Pope underlined once again in his message for the World Mission Sunday this year, 2022, the church's identity is evangelizing, to evangelize. The word conversion, missionary conversion, is also applicable also for the mission of the church in this world. And I just would like to add, I'm thinking of Jesus as the model of both dialogue and proclamation. And I'm thinking about the biblical icon, Jesus with the Samaritan woman. It would be a wonderful icon, biblical icon for those who are engaged in dialogue and proclamation. Jesus himself was the one who dialogued with another woman, with the woman of another religious tradition. So it's an inter-religious dialogue, okay, somewhat. But engaging in that dialogue, he also proclaimed himself. So very interesting. If we need some biblical, because biblical icons, I would like to focus on that. Well, just for some fantasy. Jesus is the first one, and the model for our both mission of evangelization and our task of dialogue and proclamation. Thank you very much.
If I may add something, and then Catherine Cornell. Because we had during the last days, the question also came up why we always look on the global south and not also why we are not including Europe. So in this line, dialogue includes for me also the dialogue with the secular world, and I realized that very much in parts of Europe and Germany, like Eastern Germany, where you really, like in a Japanese experience, you have to find new words. People say there is no religious language at all. There is no way of articulating religious experiences. And yes, for one part we could say, okay, that's like a desert, but in the same time, it's really like a mission field, a field for not in the first line to make conversions, also, why not? But also to learn, to reflect, to search, to first of all, to be sensitive and to learn how to talk about religion, religious experiences, and then finally coming, but I think there are many, many steps in between talking about the Christian and the Christian faith. So this, if we talk of including Europe, including enculturation in Europe, I see this field of the highly secularized parts of European society. I would like to include that in dialogue. Catherine Cornell.
And I think what I'm saying is sort of continuing on what you just said, Marcus. But one of the things that I heard in several talks over the past 3 days was sort of the new social media and how to evangelize, how to use the new forms of social media in evangelization. I just want to give you a small example of what I experienced just last month. Some of you know that I took some students from Boston College on the pilgrimage to Santiago, so we walked for 2 days. We also had a Jesuit with us to accompany us and to accompany the students. And he's very active on Twitter. And on the second day of the walk, he was a little bit nervous about, sharing what we were going through on Twitter. But I said, why not? This is a form of evangelization also, or of mission, to sort of share what we are experiencing with the 1,500 people that follow him on Twitter. Yeah. This is one person, one priest who has a following of 1,500 people on Twitter, and he started sharing, and we got all these responses from people all over the world. Pray for us, I'm praying for you, and so on. So suddenly I realized all these social media that can be used in so many creative ways to share what we are experiencing and to spread the message and to, communicate, connect with people all over the world. So since I'm not in the field of mission studies, I don't know, I'm sure it has been done, or many of you have already done work in this area, but that just, for me, was really an eye-opener. And I just became aware today that there's this enormous meeting going on here in Rome of the family.
Yes.
Also. And that connects a bit with what you were saying, Marcus, also sort of mission and evangelization between generations. So what we see is, like you were also saying, Pentecostals, their children become secularized. I think the huge generational gap in terms of secularization of the young people and the loss of affiliation, and how do we do mission, or how do we do evangelization in the family that in a credible way today. Sort of those are things that I think come up for me, at least.
Yes. Father Danny Juan.
I think the original question was what magisterial documents might be something for the future. Without, maybe because I would say probably two things. Well, first I should say that I'm a fan of Pope Francis, but that may color what I'm saying. But I think Evangelii Gaudium would be very important, because by focusing on joy, I think Pope Francis connects the talk of God with human flourishing. And I think that is one of the major questions, a question of how to speak of God in cultures where talk of God makes absolutely no sense, or where there's absolutely no meaning. And I have a feeling that part of the link is somehow the question of human flourishing. What makes human life joyful is a word that Pope Francis uses, but that gives meaning, that gives sense. What is a worthy human life? So I think that part of the question is to find a language that connects faith and human flourishing in some way. And this, I think, is part of what I'm looking for as well. In secular cultures where speaking of God makes no sense or doesn't answer any need, how do you link Christian language, Christian experience with the search for human flourishing? The second document I would say is Fratelli Tutti, primarily because I think that mission is so profoundly connected with the way we view the other. And our vision of the other conditions the way we exercise mission. I liked something very much that Rocco said, where he said, where dialogue and proclamation are no longer choices, they're just one in some way. But the thing about Fratelli Tutti is it begins with the vision of the other that is rooted. So dialogue is not a second step. It's part of Christian self-understanding. It's part of Christian identity. Because your vision of the other from the very beginning is brother or sister. Not as competitor, not as the dangerous other, not as the subhuman other. But I have a feeling that there's something profound that needs to be discovered there. That dialogue is not a second moment after we've proclaimed, but that it's part of Christian, it flows from Christian self-understanding, which I think Fratelli Tutti offers. So those questions of human flourishing and the vision of the other that is rooted in a Christian self-understanding. I don't know if that's making sense.
Any more comments?
Yeah, following up what you have been saying, just before this conference, I was in another conference of empirical theologians. Well, the title of the conference was Ecology, or Religion, Ecology, and Human Flourishing. I think as a proposal for the future, I'm basing also myself on the recent documents, I think the religious experience has to be studied and proclaimed and lived in this interconnection with the nature. In our discussion today, on the first day when I think it's Alison asked a question, I later spoke to her. I said in the Orthodox Church, they use the concept of Sophia to represent the spirit present in the nature. So everywhere you come in contact with the nature, you are in contact with the wisdom of God, with the Spirit of God. But in the Catholic tradition, we tend to identify Sophia with the Word and then with Jesus. And so there's a slight difference. But I've been reading some articles, and she also proposed a nice book. I have not read it. But I think we should move in this line where we bring in ecology or nature as part and parcel of our human and religious flourishing. Otherwise, ecology remains like a matter away and we are undermining ourselves. And okay, I don't know, we all go to heaven, but we will not live anymore here. That's the problem. So I think a future would be in that line, that trying to explore nature as part of our own journey.
Actually, that is a point which brings me back to the very beginning of our conference when Sandra Mazzolini, she pointed out how is the relation and the question of mission within theology, and how do we have an outline for studying missiology and so on. Because I think, and that would be also something to be taken up in future for our future reflection, and we can convey that also to Monsignore Indonil, because he asked us to tell him what could be what is needed for a further reflection. And I think exactly these topics, ecology, now peace, war, ethics, we have to somehow reintegrate those big topics, very, very relevant for the global society, for the global world. But we have to reintegrate it in our way, how we look at soteriology, how eschatologically we had the pneumatology in some aspects. So not just say, okay, we have a Christology, and now how can we apply that? But really tried for a reintegration, because we need to develop a language and to articulate the experiences people, especially in this field, and make and link it to our theology. So I really see the problem that there is somehow a competition and so on, but we need this ongoing dialogue, and not just say we have our compartment and that's the mission studies, but we have to continuously provoke also the theological reflection, exactly seeing these very big topics as part of the mission of the church. And yeah, I think that's a future task. Michael, the last comment is yours.
This is the first one of something new. I'm just wondering about this. It's dangerous, I think, in the middle of Rome to say, what documents shall we write next? There's far too many documents. Get away from documents. But if I'm pressed, I go back to the beginning of Dialogue and Proclamation, and some very useful distinctions being made about the key words which we use, and reference has been made to that. And I'm just thinking, those words, that language, gets a little stale and out of date, and we learn all sorts of things about what evangelization might mean, what dialogue might mean. And I just think to myself, there's work to be done in just clarifying some of those words and putting them together in a different way. Now, those words were all used to back what was basically a standoff between the Proclamation people and the Dialogue people, two different dicasteries. We know that, okay? We've got beyond that. We're prepared to talk about dialogue and proclamation and dialogue, not interchangeable, but we're friends. We don't have to see ourselves in competition. But what's the language which we want to use to try and develop it? I would suggest that talking interreligiously in terms of the mystery of salvation, which is by and large what we've done, is a bit passé. And I think from Vatican II, the very beginning of Vatican II, revelation is the key mystery, which we need to keep going back to time and time again. That's the Word of God, it's language, it's to do with the Pentecostal outpouring of charismata, all of that sort of thing. Something to do there with revelation and the way that that is cashed out in language, and something which is beyond language, obviously, silence. So maybe there's something in the middle of all of that.
Thank you. I'm pretty happy now, because somehow I feel that we entered in this last session together in a way just of commenting, responding in an easy way. I think this is somehow a little symbolic also in the way we journeyed together in the last days, and is somehow also emblematic for the spirit grown among us and for the association. And so I would like to hand over to our president, Wojciech Kluy, for the conclusion. Yes, something very practical in between, and then Wojciech's conclusion.
Some of you asked whether we were going to distribute a list of the participants with the email address. So, but we cannot do that unless we have your permission. So, how do we proceed? It's ready. If nobody has anything against it, we can send an email so that everybody has each other's email address. No risk that I will be burned here in the piazza. Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, that's true. Or email me. I will not do it immediately, so I will just wait.
So it is an honor to take this word at the end of our conference. Well, I'm not going to summarize because there were so many important issues. I think we are somehow like a minister of foreign affairs of the church. So looking, of course, with bases we have behind, but looking always to new worlds. And so we know that we don't know them, those new worlds, so we are always in process of learning how to better do our job, how to better speak about Jesus to those who are around us. So I think that was experience not only mine, but all, or at least majority of us. And somehow I was happy that sometimes we've heard, oh, sorry, we have to finish, because there's still more things to do, to say, to share. And I think this session was the best example that we could continue it, you know. So I think that's the best way to conclude the conference. It is not finished. We have now a good network of connections, and for our continuous reflection, and we can invite each other for many conferences, and that's the best. The role of the International Association of Catholic Missiologists is for just to make networking, to think together, to pray together, to reflect together on those issues. So just one very short conclusion of my conclusion of those what we are speaking about here, like a dialogue of Christian scholars, theologians with Muslim scholars in the Middle Ages, well, gave us this special elaboration of scholastic theology. It started with dialogue with Muslim scholars. So it started with others, and then it brought big enrichment for our theology. And somehow, I think that when we speak about dialogue and proclamation, Redemptoris Missio, in this perspective of activity of evangelization, this will lead us, well, I don't know if that's in our lifetime, but somehow the whole the community, whole church community, that will lead us to develop the new general system of theology somehow, a better way to present Jesus Christ in ways understandable for the people around us. So I hope that our conference also make a small step in this big process of course, not only we, also others. But well, we did our small step, and I think that that the network which was created here will continue in some ways. That's up to God to decide how, not to us. So I would like to thank very much the Urbaniana here, University, especially the Faculty of Missiology here, for this opportunity to hosting us here. Yeah, that's a good. I think we can we can think this way. So that was yeah, okay, thank you. But also I would like to thank all of you here. I mean, this special atmosphere is because every one of you makes special part in this conference, and I think it is not only a conference but kind of gathering. We also pray, perhaps not very much here, the beginning, but we also are going to pray also in a moment. So it's not only conference, it's kind of gathering, sharing, and also praying community. So I would like to thank you, all of you here present, and well, we hope that God will help us to meet next time in different places, different ways, either within IACM or other bodies. But so thank you very much. That it was really the special atmosphere, and I thank all of you here present. Thank you.
We are hoping that the proceedings will be published. Last time in Pattaya, after the publication, we sent a copy to all the participants. So we're hoping that will be possible. You will find the website of the conference will be updated. So before was for preparation, afterwards we'll have the contents that we have shared. And obviously, many of us here are not members of the ISCM, so we always make an invitation that it's possible to become members. So in that case, please write to probably the new secretary, and they will help you to get part of it. Anything about the Mass? About the Mass?
Okay, so we have the Mass in 25 minutes, 5:45, as it was said. Cardinal confirmed 2 days ago that he is coming, so it's already? Okay. So feel invited to join. It's possible to celebrate also, and oh yeah, just not to forget, after the Mass, we are all invited for a meal here, as it was in the beginning, in this main floor. So all are invited here. Okay, thank you. Thank you for reminding.